New YouGov polling suggests most countries are sympathetic to the wave of protests that have swept across Europe this summer, calling out over-tourism. Greece has just announced a series of new taxes aimed at regulating the influx of tourists, particularly in popular destinations like Santorini and Mykonos.
So the problem of mass tourism and its effects on locals and the environment is one being grappled with worldwide. But there is a school of thought that advocates slow tourism is the answer. Joining us is Amy Errmann, who is a senior lecturer in marketing and international business at the Auckland University of Technology. Very good morning to you.
Morning, Lorna.
What's slow tourism?
Yeah, so slow tourism is, you can think about it as an offshoot of mindfulness, which is really at its foundation being in the present moment with awareness and attention. So what that means for travel is, if I had to think of a tagline, it would be quality over quantity. So for example, traveling slower, whether that's walking destinations, maybe biking, spending more time in one place rather than rushing city to city, immersing yourself in the environment. So for example, maybe it's, spending a day somewhere rather than rushing from site to site, taking Instagram photos. So it's thinking about immersing yourself in the environments and taking things a bit slow.
OK, give us some examples of where it might work.
Yeah, so one really great example where it's been shown to be a huge success is actually the Faroe Islands. So the Faroe Islands highly regulates tourists, and people that go there have to actually hire local guides. And what the guides do is they take them around. They might spend, for example, 5 or 6 hours at one site. There's regulations around environmental control. So not, for example, letting people walk anywhere over the grass, damaging the trees, that type of thing. Also, people don't take as many photos. So you tend to have experiences that stick out in your memory. Again, rather than going to, 10 different sites and just sticking it up on Instagram. And there's another thing around spending more on less. So, for example, what the Faroe Islands does is a lot of the restaurants are quite expensive. So you might have to select one rather than going to, 10 different restaurants that might be a bit cheaper. But you tend to have these lasting memories which stick out. So I'd say that's one destination where they're kind of, I'll say, doing it right.
So many different places are trying to manage the negative effects of over-tourism. We've seen protests in the Canary Islands. I mentioned Greece there as well. What are people doing around the world? New Zealand has just introduced a tax, hasn't it?
Yeah, so New Zealand has recently, we have always had a tax, but they basically tripled it. So it used to be $30, it's now going to $100. But what that's meant to do is essentially, again, they're looking for kind of quality over quantity. So they're wanting people to come that are willing to pay that tax. But what it's meant to do is just help mitigate certain environmental factors. So for example, I know, same with Australia, we have a bit of a culture where people like to take road trips and maybe camp in their vans. So, along with that comes people dumping garbage, maybe going to the toilet in places in the bush where there's no toilet. And so that tax is meant for the government to be able to help clean that up and kind of actually sustain the travel that people are doing. So it's not necessarily just a bump in surplus that the government's going to have something to do with. They're actually going to use it to mitigate environmental effects as well.
It's a fine balance, though, isn't it, Amy? Because tourism is so important to so many countries' economies.
Yes, definitely. And, I've spent a lot of time traveling and talking to locals. And one of the really interesting things I'm noticing is that when locals see a direct benefit, they're much more welcoming and happy for tourists to come versus when they don't. So, for example, I was in Bali recently chatting with a lot of the locals, and they love tourists. They want them to come. They see the direct benefit to their wallets because a lot of them work in the tourism industry. Their kind of concern was actually having the government help manage some of the waste. But when you chat with locals in Europe, they often don't see this direct benefit. They actually see the converse thing happen. They see rents go up, food become more expensive, just crowding in general. So I think, as travelers, what we can do is understand, are the locals actually, seeing a benefit from me coming, and how can I learn about the culture before I go? Because if they're not, how can I, again, help mitigate that?
I'm lucky enough to be going to Bali next month, so give me some pointers on how I can do slow tourism.
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned when I went was they have heaps of tour guides. There's a lot of them. And so if you meet one person that sticks out, whether that's they have a lot of private drivers there, for example, stick with the same guide for the duration of your trip, because what happens is the more personal it becomes, the more they'll take you to sites that are off the kind of we'll say like the tourist trap area. They'll take you to things that are less well known. Some of them even invite you into their homes to try some of the local food. So I think, try and find someone you feel really comfortable with. Bali has such a kind of guiding environment that's different to other types of places where you go and you don't hire guides. So I'd say that's kind of my top tip.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Amy.
No worries.
Amy Errmann, thank you for giving us the insight on slow tourism.
No worries. Thank you.